No matter someone's circumstances in life, there's always things that people are going to take for granted. And one of those things that I believe is people don't consider their health. And that's what I think Hippocrates meant when he said healing is a matter of time, but is also sometimes a matter of opportunity. My name is Lauren Bradford, and I'm a junior here at Frisco High School. This is my first year in ISM, and I'm studying pediatric physical therapy. My topic became interesting to me halfway through last year, which is my sophomore year. And I had always known that I wanted to do something with kids, and I had always known that I wanted to do something in the healthcare industry. And so I actually got into this ISM program on pediatric nursing, which I then switched to pediatric physical therapy within the first month. And I did this because my brother is currently in college. He's a junior at Northwestern State University in Louisiana, and he's studying to become a physical therapist. And he kind of just explained to me how exciting everything that he's learning is, and it just really got me excited, and I wanted to learn more about it. So that's when I chose that I wanted to do pediatric physical therapy as my topic for this year, which I just talked about. For my interviews, I interviewed 6 different people. My first one was Katie Brown, who works at Suggs Pediatric Outpatient Therapy Services, which they just call SPOTS, and this is in Dallas. And one of the big things that we talked about was the different types of physical therapy. For example, I'm doing pediatrics, which is completely different from sports PT and from geriatrics and so on. Another thing that we talked about in our interview was income. And this was something that I hadn't really taken into consideration. And she talked about how somebody who is in orthopedic physical therapy will make more money than somebody in sports physical therapy, who will make more than somebody in pediatric physical therapy. And she actually told me that pediatric physical therapists actually make the least out of all physical therapists. Candace Kramer was my second interview, and she works at Integrative Pediatric Therapy, and they have an office in Dallas and in Plano. And so she switches back and forth between the 2 offices throughout the week. And she talked to me a lot about communication, which this was both between the child and between the parents, because obviously it's a big deal for the kid because they're already going through something, but it's also very big for the parents because they want their child to be the best that they can be. And so the big thing that she talked about was you have to, whenever you're talking to the kids, you have to make sure that it's on a level that they can understand and they'll truly want to improve. And for the parents, you have to make it presented in a way that they're not getting overwhelmed and that they know how they can help their child. We also talked about the process of creating a treatment plan, which is actually a lot of steps. And I hadn't really thought about it because I originally had thought that the child comes in and then you just kind of watch them and see what they do, which this is true, but I thought it just stopped there. And what actually happens is the child comes in and they have about an hour to just observe the child doing different activities, both fine motor and gross motor. And then they also have the kids interacting with other children so they can see how their social skills are. And then from there, they take the strengths and weaknesses and they set up a treatment plan so they can build up the weaknesses. And then Candace Kramer was also really exciting to interview because she also let me do an hour-long observation after my interview. And this was really cool because it was the first time I had ever gotten to see pediatric physical therapy in its full value. And the child that I got to observe had cerebral palsy, and I didn't really know what this was whenever I found out that this is what the child had. So later I did a research assessment about it, which I'll talk about later. And it was just really cool to see this kid and how Candace interacted with him. And basically everything that they do is play, because if the child knows that they're working on something, odds are they're not going to want to do it. But if you make it seem like play, they're automatically going to want to do whatever you want them to do. My third interview was with Jessica Coates, who also works at Integrative Pediatric Therapy in Dallas. And Candace was actually the one who wanted me to interview Jessica. And this is because she's an occupational therapist, which is a lot more of the fine motor skills, like handwriting, like using your fingers, stuff like that. And it was really cool to do this because it honestly made me interested in possibly doing occupational therapy next year, because it just seems so cool to get on a more personal level in occupational therapy than I believe that you get on physical therapy. And Jessica talked to me about fine versus gross motor skills, which I kind of just explained. Fine motor is more of like tactile, hand on hand, anything like that, like you're doing handwriting, you're drawing pictures, you're building stuff with your fingers. Whereas gross motor is more like how your entire body moves, how your hips line up with your knees and your legs and how they move. My fourth interview was with Melissa Koch, who works at Children's Hospital in Dallas. And I actually had a phone interview with her because we could never set up a time where I could drive down there that she would be there. And Melissa was really cool to talk to because she works more on the neurological side of physical therapy. And this was really interesting because she had something completely different in her job than I thought that I was going to be learning. Because what she does is she works with kids who have been in car accidents or stuff like that, where they used to know how to do something and now they're having to rebuild that skill. And this was honestly kind of sad, but at the same time it was really interesting to me because it's different when you have a child who is born with a defect and they don't know how something is supposed to work, whereas these kids have known what it's like to be able to do something, and now they won't be able to do it the same way. They can only hope that they can get as close to that as possible. And another thing Melissa talked to me about was knowing Spanish, because in this part of Dallas, there's a lot of kids who live in Spanish-speaking households, and a lot of times they have to have a translator there because of the fact that they can't speak Spanish. And this is actually something that was really interesting to me because living in Texas, there's a lot more Spanish speaking than there is most likely anywhere else in the US. And so this honestly kind of made me think about possibly wanting to minor in Spanish when I go to college, just because I plan on living in the Dallas-Fort Worth area once I graduate. And so it would just be a good skill to have. It would give me more job opportunities for sure if I ended up doing that. Bonnie Rogers was my fifth interview, and she also works at Integrative Pediatric Therapy in Dallas. And she was really interesting to talk about because I originally asked her how she became interested in physical therapy, and it was pretty similar to how I became interested. She became interested in physical therapy because she tore her ACL in high school. She played volleyball, and so after she went to physical therapy, she became really interested in it, wanted to learn more. And so she decided that she wanted to be a physical therapist when she went to college. And when it says balancing in college on my PowerPoint, it just means that she was talking about how, because in college for physical therapists, you go through your 4 years and you get your master's, and then you have to go on to get your doctorate, which for her was only 2 years, but now it's changed so that it's 3 years. And she was just talking about how in physical therapy school, it's very like, you're always working on something. If you're not sleeping or eating, you're working on stuff for school. And so that also covers the PT school. Kristen Dodd was my sixth interview, and she works at Children's Plano. And this was a rough interview for me because for our interviews, they're supposed to be 15 to 30 minutes, and we were done in a little under 15. And this wasn't necessarily because my questions weren't there. It was more of the fact that I wasn't getting answers back, and I would inquire more after I was getting yes or no answers, and I was just getting shut down basically. It was kind of a discouraging interview, but at the same time I learned what you don't want to do as a professional, because when you're sitting at a table with your legs up and your feet on the table while somebody who wants to study your topic is trying to question you, it's kind of a discouraging thing, and it was a really frustrating experience for me, but I did learn how you want to be excited about your career and how you want to encourage other people to join your career because you really love it like that much. For my research assessments, I have done 6 assessments so far, and my first one was over spina bifida, and spina bifida is damage to the nerves around the spinal cord. And this can lead to hydrocephalus, which is fluid in the skull. And there's no way to prevent it medically, but definitely this is one disease or defect that develops while the child is in the mother's womb. And so since it's not medically preventable, it's encouraged for mothers to just stay healthy, stay active, just do everything they possibly can to make sure that they are on the right track to having a healthy baby. And spina bifida, I actually get to observe a patient at my mentor's facility that has spina bifida, and it's actually really interesting now that I've done the research about it. I know certain things that the child doesn't know what they're doing differently, and so now that I know that, it's easier to see why my mentor plans certain activities around those things. My second research assessment was over Asperger's syndrome. And Asperger's syndrome is an autism spectrum disorder, and usually it's detected because of social impairments. There's a lack of social skills in the child, and this also leads to a lack of communication skills, so the child can't verbally say what he wants or what he wants to do. It's just very touch and go in a family, and this is usually why kids are brought to physical therapy, because they want to know, parents want to know why their child is acting differently, why they can't behave in the classroom, stuff like that. And so that's when the child gets evaluated. Asperger's is usually detected before 2, but from 2 to about 6, there's a wide range of where the child is growing. They're learning to talk, they're learning how to participate. So there's this gap in between where nobody really thinks about if you have Asperger's syndrome, but once you get to 6 or 7 and you're in elementary school and these kids are starting to behave in a patterned behavior, that's when parents start to realize that something might be wrong. So usually it's detected before 2 years, or it's detected between the ages 6 and 7. Play therapy was my third research assessment, and this was actually from the UNT trip. I attended a play therapy class, and this was more of a counseling class, but I still feel like I got a lot of information out of it. And one of the big things that we talked about was encouragement versus praise when you're working with kids. And originally I thought that I enjoyed praise more because it was something that people were telling you, like, oh, that was really good, like you nailed that, like it made you feel really good about yourself. But later I realized that I liked encouragement more because it gives you something to work towards. And this is a big thing that you have to incorporate when you're working with kids in physical therapy, is because if you give them too much praise, ultimately they'll shut down because they believe that everything that they're doing is perfect, so they don't feel like there's need for improvement. Whereas if you're encouraging them, you're saying, hey, you'll get it next time, like you did this great, but you can do this better, they'll want to keep working to get that ultimate praise. My fourth research assessment was over cerebral palsy. In cerebral palsy, this, like I said earlier, was when I had my observation of Candace when I first noticed this. It permanently affects muscle movement and body coordination, but it doesn't worsen. So physical therapy can only enhance the skills, but it can't regain everything. And it ranges from being unable to walk, and it goes all the way to nobody can even notice that you really have it, like you don't need any assistance. And so obviously people who go to physical therapy for their cerebral palsy are more towards the inability side because they need things to be fixed. My fifth research assessment was for physical therapy versus occupational therapy, and this really became interesting to me after my interview with Jessica Coates, who is the occupational therapist. And one of the really interesting things about physical versus occupational therapy is the basic physical therapy is more gross motor skills and occupational therapy is more fine motor skills. So physical therapy, like I said earlier, is full body movement, whereas occupational is like fingers, hands, getting those tactile movements down. And physical therapists, like I said before, they need a doctorate once they go to PT school, whereas occupational therapists usually only need a master's degree. Also, physical therapists get paid more than occupational therapists in the workplace. Every physical therapist needs to be licensed, whereas licensing of occupational therapists varies by states. And the specialties for each is very different. Like physical therapy, you can specialize in pediatrics, sports, orthopedics, geriatrics, whereas occupational, it's more you specialize in speech therapy, or you specialize in school systems where you go into the schools and get to help children in that schooling environment. My sixth research assessment was over scoliosis, which everyone here has been tested for their freshman year when we all get called down to the nurse's office, and it's really awkward for everyone. And scoliosis is a musculoskeletal disorder in which there's a sideways curvature of the spine. And this became interesting to me because with my mentor, there's a child who is actually about to graduate from physical therapy, and he went to his doctor to get evaluated, and he's actually developing scoliosis. And so one of the things that my mentor and I are going to try, well, my mentor, but I will be there, she's going to try using kinetic tape, which athletes have probably used it. It's the KT tape that you use on your different muscles that are sore and stuff like that. And so they're going to try doing that around his spine so that it can hopefully straighten out. My mentor is Bonnie Rogers, who was my 5th interview, and Bonnie works at Integrative Pediatric Therapy in Dallas. She's only there part-time though, so she works on Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, which sometimes is very hard to schedule because of our A week, B week type schedule. And she graduated from Texas Tech, where she went for college to get her master's, and she also went to get her doctorate degree in physical therapy. Before working at Integrated Pediatric Therapy, where she's been for 6 years, she worked at a hospital for 2 years where she worked with children who had neurological disorders like Melissa does. And for our original work, we created a sample assessment, which I'll talk more about later. And she's very cool because she lets me play in the gym with the kids. Like, I get to interact with them. If we're doing an activity that includes like throwing a ball, the child will be throwing the ball to me and I'll be tossing the ball back to the child. And also she encourages me to play on the swings that are in the gym, which at first I thought was really weird, but honestly it's really fun. And for my original work, like I said, we created a sample evaluation, which some of you actually ended up helping me with. And for my sample evaluation, it included doing a fine motor packet, which was this. I don't know if you guys got to see it, but I'm going to pass it around. And it basically just shows how the kid works with a pencil. Like, can they copy an image that's provided for them? Can they draw inside the lines? Can they fold a paper? And that ended up going with this scoring packet, which was pretty interesting because it shows you, which I'm going to pass this around too, it's scaled, like if you go outside the lines this many times, you take out this many points, stuff like that. Kaylee, you can look at that. And so before I got to this point though, I was tasked with choosing which type of evaluation I wanted to do, which was, you can see there, it's the BOT2 versus the PDMS2. And the BOT2 is what I ended up doing because it's much more easy to read, whereas the PDMS is a lot more actual reading. It's pretty much a textbook, and you get to do not very many fun things, if I'm going to be honest with you, if you want to see those. And the BOT2 actually has the scores in it that I did with y'all. And the BOT2 was interesting because it had both fine motor and gross motor skills. And whenever I had you guys doing the activities in class, I had to make alterations to it because obviously if Kaylee was here doing an activity that a child who needs physical therapy is doing, Kaylee's obviously going to do it better because Kaylee knows how to do those skills. So for example, when Alex had to do the balancing act where he had to walk on a straight line, I took him outside to the curb where he had to walk, and I counted how many times his ankle would waver back and forth. And so each time his ankle wavered, I took off a point. Whereas a child who is doing the same activity who needs physical therapy, they would stumble over their feet, like they would fall off the line, something like that. And so that was really interesting. And so after I totaled up all the scores, I inputted those into a computer, and it printed out this BOT exam, which is basically just a printed out copy of that. And it has all of the information here. And so then I created a treatment plan, which is basically split up between strengths and weaknesses. Sorry, I'm giving you guys so many papers. The treatment plan, you have to get strengths and weaknesses, and for every weakness, you have to have a goal set. Like if a child can't balance, you have to set up a goal that says they'll be able to balance for this many seconds doing this activity. And like I said, for the goals, you have to have an activity to do. Like if the person can't balance, you have them standing on a balance beam while moving back and forth with the ball, stuff like that. And so for my final product plan, Bonnie and I talked about creating gym equipment, which these are actually some of the swings that Integrated Pediatric Therapy in Dallas has. And that swing in the middle is actually they call it a zero gravity swing, and it's really fun to sit on. I'm not gonna lie, I kind of want to build something off of that, or an activity that uses that, just some kind of incorporation of one of these swings. And I can't wait to see how the rest of my final product plans out. Thank you guys.